Hello, and welcome to Community Spotlight, where we highlight organizations and offices local to Goffstown, New Hampshire. I am one of your hosts, Nicole, and I am here with Selectwoman Kelly Boyer, chair of the Goffstown Select Board. Thank you so much for joining me, Kelly.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've recently heard that some people just have no idea what the Goffstown Select Board actually does. So I was thinking we'd start off with what do you guys actually do on the board? What are the members responsible for at a high level?
Sure. So a select board is something that was new to me when I first moved to New Hampshire. I grew up in the Midwest, and I found that it was a very New England style of government. But the way that I describe it in the most simplified terms is that the select board operates as the executive branch of our municipal government, and it kind of acts as a hybrid between a mayor, alderman, city council, but works very interchangeably with all of the departments and the other boards and committees in our town.
And so what kinds of things might an example board meeting be addressing?
Well, we deal with the day-to-day things and also the big picture planning for our community. So our board meetings are always different, and we deal with things like approving policies, doing hiring, any kind of HR functionality that happens within the town, ordinances, any kind of variances for our community for anything that needs an exception, hearing from other community members and any kind of public comment. We also deal with other boards and committees or department requests for specific spending items that were either perhaps out of the budget, or if an opportunity presents itself, we kind of manage those requests. They really are intricate for everything that we handle, but I think the most important thing to understand is that the board operates as a whole, so none of us make decisions independently, and also that we operate very simultaneously with our departments and also our other boards and committees. So it's a very complex but fluid process that we have, where all of those different subjects and committees have to work together to bring information forward to the board to help us make decisions, and that a lot of our work is done outside of select board meetings because we all sit on different committees and going to meetings all of the time, so that we can be very integrated in those boards and committees, so that at the select board meetings we can make good decisions.
Well, that makes sense. So you mentioned that there are a variety of town departments you oversee. Can you just let everyone know what those are?
Sure. So in the town of Goffstown, we have 6 departments. We have the Department of Public Works, Parks and Recreation, the library, fire, PD, and then town hall.
But the library trustees, you told me, oversee the library, right? So you have the other 5?
Correct. So we directly oversee those 5 departments. The library board of trustees governs the library, and they also have specific RSAs that they have to manage. But for the most part, we oversee those 6 departments.
Ah, okay, very good. So let's really make this tangible. Can you give me an example or two of how the select board might impact just a given resident in town?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, well, first and foremost, the budget. That's probably the biggest one. We also oversee elections, so that's a really important time for residents to voice their concerns. Once members are elected to the select board, we have jurisdiction over things that could impact your day-to-day life. For example, making sure that your trash is getting picked up, that the road plan, your road is getting paved, that programming is accessible for you and your kids, that town hall is open at specific times. So those are kind of like the baseline things that we work interchangeably with our department heads to make sure all of that stuff happens. And then there's things like, obviously, spending, grant funding coming into the community. If we weren't doing those things adequately, that could have a really big impact on the town as a whole. And just basically making sure that the day-to-day operations are handled appropriately from a resident side, and then also from our staff side. So we oversee all of the town employees and all of the departments, which means that we're responsible for policies and procedure, licensing of all of our software for town. So those kind of operational things are very important for the employees, which has to do with onboarding, retention, things like that. And then we also have to, look at the big picture planning. We have a 10-year plan, the master plan, that gets put out by the planning board, but we operate in trying to support that. So not only are we taking residents' wishes through the budget and what they vote on election day, but also working simultaneously with that plan. So we physically sign off on payroll every week, and then also kind of look at the big things coming down the line.
That's a lot.
It is, yeah.
So you've mentioned policies a few times, and I've heard actually somebody ask, what actually do you mean by policies? Like, what kind of policies are we talking about here?
So I would say the primary bulk of it is for the employees. So anything like earn time, sexual harassment policies, work from home policies, earn time, overtime, any kind of employee relations stuff that we put out. Those are the overarching policies for every employee. And then departments might have additional policies beyond that where it's department specific. But we also will do things like Station 17 review, and we have to create policy when things come up for how to operate within those specific lanes for us also as a board. So obviously we're all governed by RSA, by the state of New Hampshire, and they kind of dictate power and authority, but our select board in its current state, and as long as I've been on the board, holds ourselves in high regard. So ordinances for community members, policies for our employees and departments and how they operate efficiently, and then also for ourselves.
Very good. And you mentioned that you work with a lot of other elected boards and committees in town. Can you tell me a little bit about how and why it's important for you guys to be working with, say, budget committee and planning board, and sort of how does that come together?
So each select board member is assigned different committees at the beginning of the year once elections are over, and we all sit on multiples. Some of those committees meet more often throughout the year, and some are busy at specific times of the year, and some meet quarterly, so a little bit more infrequently. So the chair will try to balance ones that meet often or based on your scheduled ability with maybe another one that's not so often. So we try to balance it out for each member, but essentially each board is different, and sometimes we sit there as voting members, like on the budget committee, the conservation commission, the planning board. They're voting members in that capacity, so they're sitting there on behalf of the select board to help have discussions about things going on in the community, and then also to bring information back to the board. There are also other boards that we sit on, like the Library Board of Trustees, where we're non-voting members. So that means we just sit there in sort of an advisory capacity, and then again bring things back to the select board. The reason that's important is because there is so much that goes on day to day in our community, and having that bring back directly from the select board members is really important so that we can kind of be staying in touch with everything that's going on. We're kind of getting a little bit of input and insight into warrant articles coming up in the next budgeting season. We're getting the pulse on employees. We're getting the pulse on what the board thinks is priorities. So it's very important that we stay very integrated in that. As you can imagine, it's a lot of meeting nights, but it is something that we all do almost every single night sometimes. So
there's definitely a lot going on in town. I've found even just trying to schedule things like this, that there are lots of other competing priorities. So how does the select board contribute to the town's budget development? What does that process look like?
The town budgeting process is very intricate. As you know, as a school board member, there's a school budget and there's also a municipal budget. From the municipal budget perspective, the department heads bring forward a budget to the select board. So those, there's a lot of things that play into that for things that they don't have control over, such as utility costs like electricity and water. Also, if there's contracts that their departments have to adhere to for contractual pay increases for their employees, also things like benefits. All of those numbers fluctuate year over year. And then they bring not only their operational cost, but then their project costs for specific things that they have to do over the course of the year. So the department heads work a long time to get those prepared, pretty much the course of the year. They bring it forward to the select board, and we have budget deliberations, which we just finished the other night. So we heard their initial plans, their initial budgets. They also go through the CIP process, which is the capital improvements process or program for the planning board processing. So that means all of the big projects over the next 6 years get put on a matrix so that we can try to balance out specific costs to our community. So that way we're not buying things all in one year or putting money into buildings or what have you. We can kind of try to spread it out to make the tax impact a little bit more manageable for residents. So they do those two things, and then they enter into the budgeting process. So what the select board does at that point is gives input, asks a lot of questions, tries to find ways that we can either, make sure we're being budgetarily conscious of the things that we're asking for. Our department heads do an amazing job of really putting in our needs specifically and not things that would be nice to have. And we work through it with them just to see where we're at. The select board sets the tax rate at some point based on articles that are voted by the voters, and then also all of the other things that come into play. So we have county tax, we have state tax, we have a bunch of stuff that we have to look at. But this very beginning part of the budget process starts, and then it moves over to the budget committee, which is a committee in town, an elected board that has elected members and then also representatives from the school board and the select board that sit on that committee. They go through the process as well. They hear from all of the departments. They hear from all of the schools. They hear the CIP projects for the next 6 years. And they also go through the budget in the same way. They go line by line for each item, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, if there's places we can combine things or maybe come up with better ideas for how to budget for our community, looking at the next fiscal year, but then also the long-term plans for the community. At that point, once they're done, it comes back to the select board, and then we make a recommendation to the voters. So that process, we go through it all again. We look at everything. We make sure that everything's buttoned up, that we've spaced our projects appropriately, that we have everything we need for the next year, and that we've adjusted all of our rates based on what we're being offered from our vendors, like, again, benefits and utilities. Then from there, we go to deliberative session, which is where we present that budget to our community members. And at that point, they can ask questions, make recommendations. There's a process for making changes to warrant articles at that point. And once that's all set, then we move on to election day, on voting day. So it's a very long process that we go through for budget.
I'm pretty sure I learned some things out of that talk, so thank you. And so that's what community members will see on the ballot, right? Is that final decision by the select board to either recommend or not recommend the things that are there.
Yeah, and that any warrant article will have, any project or budget related thing will have a recommendation from the select board for municipal articles, as well as the budget committee. So they take separate votes from us so that voters can see the recommendations by both governing bodies. And same with the school articles, they'll see a recommendation by the school board as well as the budget committee as well. So the budget committee plays an intricate role in overseeing both, and each of those governing bodies play a role in their own warrant articles that are being presented.
Very good. So in your opinion, what makes a good select board member, and what should voters be looking for in their select board candidates?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think in my years on the select board, I've been very fortunate to work with people who genuinely care a lot about our community. And we all have that commonality within each other, and that's always the driving force behind everything that we do. So we certainly don't agree on things all the time. We don't agree on how to get to things all the time and what roads to take. However, we all have a difference of opinion that is a strength of ours for sure, because all of the members of the board work together simultaneously in a very respectful way where we listen to each other, we're very kind to each other when we're working through stuff. And that is a huge strength of, or should be a huge strength of anybody who's gonna be on the select board, because having that commonality to acknowledge that we might not agree on things, but we're gonna work through it is the value of having a select board in general. So I think someone who's willing to do that, to listen to other people, to take all sides of an equation into consideration before they make a decision is a really important piece. I think also separating your own personal interests. So, as a taxpayer myself, sometimes there's things that I'd be more than willing to do with my tax dollars. However, my vote as a selectman might be different depending on what's best for the community as a whole. So I think being able to separate that responsibility for being a voice for the community and every taxpayer versus yourself is something that's very important. All of us are constantly learning. So by no means does someone need to know everything, but they need to be willing to show up and do the work because things are constantly changing. We're constantly getting new things put on the table that we all have to do research for. We have to ask questions and do work to make sure that we're constantly understanding what's happening.
Yeah.
So having someone who's willing to show up and do it is invaluable because there's nothing worse than having stuff thrown at you and getting in the weeds because we're unsure. I can't praise our department heads enough, but we are very fortunate to work with a team who does a very good job of giving us the information that we need. So you certainly have to be willing to do that work ahead of time so that you can function efficiently in meetings.
So by doing that work ahead of time, you mean making sure that you're reading everything that's provided to you, showing up well informed?
Yes, exactly. None of us are subject matter experts on every single department. We hire professionals who are subject matter experts, and there's always a level of trust and prep work that goes into making any decision. However, the ability to constantly be questioning in a really respectful way is something that helps us ensure that we're making the best decision. Ultimately, we sit there as the representatives of all of the taxpayers and also of our municipal departments and town employees. So it's a constant balance of what makes the most sense and what will be the most efficient, what will be the most cost effective, and having a really broad knowledge on those specific topics as they come up is sometimes a struggle to get that much work in before meetings happen.
Right. I like what you said about being willing to consider the collective good versus just yourself. And I think your example of, well, I might want to spend on something while other people don't. And it could be vice versa as well. You might not want to spend on something that is ultimately beneficial to a wide portion of the town. So important to be able to put your personal needs aside for the betterment of the community.
Yeah, it is always a judgment. And I think also while you're doing that work, having the ability to kind of let your ego out the door and sometimes just say, I don't understand this. And so I guess, really showing up, doing the work, and being flexible in what you're doing is really valuable.
So what else do you think the community might need to know about Select Board?
I think that, I think I've already said it, but that the Select Board has an incredibly complex role in the variety of things that we're working with on a regular basis. I have an HR background, so something like contract negotiations for our unions is something that I have experience in, but that's not something that everyone has experience in. So we all bring strengths to the table for specific things, and we're constantly working through how to do those things. Again, partnering with our departments and other boards and things like that. So I think just acknowledging how much time and effort goes into that is another component, is that having the community voice involved is really important for our decision-making process. So I would want community members to know that they should reach out to their elected boards, that there are things that we could do that have impact on people's day-to-day lives. As I stated before, none of us make decisions independently, and we rarely as a board do anything without having a significant amount of prep work to prepare for that decision. However, voicing your opinion certainly can change minds if it's something you feel passionate about. I would strongly suggest that people familiarize themselves with the processes or ask questions, because it is very complex and there's a lot of moving pieces to running a town. So I'm not quite sure if it's something for the board in particular or just general civics for our municipality as a whole, but I have been asked before, who's the mayor of Goffstown? So I just really encourage everyone to get acquainted with the different roles in our community and who's in those roles and what those boards do, because it is a lot. It's
Yeah.
very complex.
And just to be clear, there's no mayor of Goffstown.
That is correct.
Officially.
Yes,
There's
yes.
no official mayor of Goffstown.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This has been really helpful. And thank you very much to all of our viewers as well. And stay tuned for our next Community Spotlight. Thank you.